and welcome back to Mariana Mass Books. My name is Mariana and today I am here with a wrap-up style video to wrap up the books that I have read since I did my mid-year book freakout tag. I'm going to start with Beyond This Dark House. Beyond This Dark House, which is the poetry collection of Gavriel. I bought this book immediately after I finished The Lions of Al-Rassan. I actually looked if Gavriel had a poetry collection after I finished The Lions of Al-Rassan, because the way he writes and his prose, and he does write some poetry within the book, and I just thought that he would be great at poetry, and I was so excited when I see that he actually had a poetry collection. So I'm glad I read it, and I do have some favorite poems in there, but in general it's not my favorite poetry collection that I have read, mostly because I feel like not all of the poems work as poems in verse. Actually, what I was thinking while reading the book is that a lot of these poems would work better as prose poetry if this book had a mixture of prose and verse poetry and it was presented like that. I think that I would have given it at least 4 stars instead of the 3 that I gave it. They were beautifully written, and his writing is beautiful. And so if they had been prose poems, I would have loved most of them. You can see that it is tabbed. I have some favorite poems in here and I have some favorite verses in here. The poems that I enjoyed most were his poems about place. So he has some poems written about places in England, and then there are also a lot of poems where he writes to a Greek woman that he loves. There are a lot of love poems to Greece and to the woman he met in Greece. Those were my absolute favorite. And with poetry, it's funny. Reading books in general is funny, but I feel like if this book had been a super short tiny book with only his poems about place, I probably would have given this book 5 stars, but because he mixes in there some other poems that I think didn't work as well in verse, that's why I didn't end up loving the collection as a whole. So I did enjoy it, just I think he's better at prose, and I think that there are better poetry collections out there. But if you have read Gavriel and you love him, then I would definitely recommend you buy this book, because it's definitely worth it to read him, because just reading him, even through his poetry, you fall more in love with his mind, which I talked about when I did my mid-year freakout tag. Then I want to talk about Dragon Keeper, which is book 1 in the Rainwild Chronicles, which is the 4th series within the realm of the Elderlings by Hobb. I'm not going to talk a lot about this series because it's very further along within the series, and I'm not going to bore you guys with everything. I will just say that I'm body reading this with Elle from Elle Thinks. You know this because I talk about it every time I talk about Hobb. The interesting thing about this series is that instead of being a trilogy, it's a quartet. And so when we started the series, we were talking about wondering why that was. And when we were reading, we were thinking, okay, well, we'll see why that is when we read the book. And it's a bit strange the way that it's broken up. Book 1, while it was good, it didn't feel like a complete story. And then book 2, which is Dragon Haven, which is my most recent finish, I'll talk about it right now, I think, but it seems, Dragon Keeper doesn't feel like a complete story, but then Dragon Haven, when you finish that one, now you feel like there was a complete arc, a complete story that feels like those two together feel like a whole story. But definitely they wouldn't have been able to be published together because it would have been, I think, over 1,000 pages if you put those two books together. But I also, when I think about, well, maybe book one should have been edited a bit so that you could put those two stories into one and then form a whole story. When I think about that, I honestly can't think what I would take out from book one. So I think maybe this was a matter of there was a bit too much story for 3 books, but there wasn't enough story for 4. So it's divided weirdly. It's still Robin Hobb, so she's amazing, and you are never reading a Robin Hobb book thinking, ugh, what is this? At least I'm not. But it definitely feels weird the way she decided to break things up. Then I'm going to talk about, to switch it up completely, a literary fiction book. Yes, you heard me correctly, literary fiction. I did read literary fiction this month. The book I'm talking about is Men the Living by Maylis de Kerangal, or The Heart. It's translated differently. It has a translator in the British publication is Men the Living, and it is translated by the person that you can read on the screen. And then the American publication is called The Heart, and it is translated by the person that you will see on the screen. I read the book in Spanish, but I'm going to put the English translation here so you can look for it if you want to. This book was amazing. This book is definitely going to be in my top 3 of the year unless I read like amazing books the second semester. It's one of those books that you finish it and your throat is closed, your heart is compressed, your mind is blown, and you just stare at the wall or at the ceiling or at the book, and you have to process what you just read and try not to break down and explode and implode at the same time. It's one of those books. So this book takes place within 24 hours and it follows different perspectives within those 24 hours surrounding a single event. And the event is that there is a surfer, a young surfer, who dies. That's how the novel starts, so it's not a spoiler. And if you read the synopsis, you know that he will donate his organs. And the whole book is during those 24 hours following different perspectives. So you follow the mother, you follow the father, you follow the doctor who is attending him, you follow the nurse, you follow the doctor who is in charge of the transplant. The book in American English is translated as The Heart because the heart is the main organ that the book focuses on, and it actually starts with talking about the heart, and all throughout the book there are reflections and musings about the heart and about the symbolic nature of the heart and what it means to give a heart or for a heart to stop. It's honestly astoundingly brilliant in my opinion, not only because of the topic but because the way it is written. I actually read a lot of negative reviews that complain about the way that the author writes because she writes really long run-on sentences. And when I say that, I mean that you will find sentences that go for 2 pages, one single sentence, 2 pages. And that is something that I adore. I love when authors can do that brilliantly and pull that off. I saw some reviews that said that's a bit pretentious, but in this particular case, I don't think it is at all, because I think that the way it's written, those long run-on sentences, actually keep you at the edge of your seat. It's very interesting how a writing style that could usually be considered slow or boring, or that you're just like, oh my god, just go on with the point already. In this case, it actually functions to keep you on the edge of your seat, because you are reading only 24 hours. You know what the final event is going to be, but because you have these long run-on sentences, then you are like on the edge of your seat, because you know, but it's keeps going and keeps going, and you're on the edge of your seat waiting for that moment to happen. And also, the writing style, physically, it feels like this. It literally feels like this. Like, that's how the sentences feel. Like, it goes, it goes, it goes, it goes, it goes, it comes back. It goes, it goes, it goes, it goes, it comes back. And the main character, or not the main character, but the man who dies at the beginning, he is a surfer. And as I said, the heart is the organ that the book focuses on. And so there is a lot of like parallels and metaphors and talk about waves and about the beating of the heart. And so the style of writing and the way it moves literally mimics the waves or the beating of the heart. I think it goes without saying that I love this book, that I gave it 5 stars, and that I highly recommend it. I will warn you about the writing style, so if you're someone who cannot handle absolutely long run-on sentences, don't pick up this book. I would suggest you go to Amazon and check out the feature that you can look inside the book and read the first sentence, because the first sentence is super long. So if you don't like that first sentence, you won't like the book. That first sentence is what actually hooked me, and I said I need to read this book right this instant. I read the first sentence, I showed the first sentence to my mom, she was like, oh my god, and so we both read it and we both loved it, and now I want to read more Maylis the Kerangal. Then I'm going to talk about The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden, which is book 1 in the Winter Night trilogy. It is a fantasy series based on Russian folklore and folk tales and that type of thing. So it has like a folk tale-y, woodsy, wintry vibe, which sounds very much like my thing. This is not a new trilogy, it has been out for a while. It's one of the first trilogies that I saw recommended on BookTube when I first started watching BookTube, and I've been wanting to read it ever since. I was a bit bummed because I thought this was going to be a 5-star super hit for me, and it wasn't. And as I said in my Goodreads review, I think it kind of was my own fault, because the book begins with a folk tale. The book begins with like an old woman telling a folk tale. So just from those vibes alone, I thought I was going to love it. It sounds very much like my thing. But after the folk tale was told, I immediately developed a whole plot in my mind. I thought, oh, this is what's going to happen, it's going to be so good, and I was so excited, and this wasn't that, and I was disappointed about the book not meeting my own fake expectations, because no one had ever talked about that in reviews. Like, it wasn't like I had watched reviews and people talk about something and I got excited about that. It was just me getting excited about an invented plot that I had in my mind, and the plot wasn't what I thought it was going to be, and I was disappointed about that. So if you're interested in this series, let me tell you, it is beautifully told. The vibes are amazing. If you like folk tales, if you like fairy tales, if you like winter woods, talking spirits, talking animals, a young woman protagonist that is independent and headstrong. If you like those things, then I would recommend you check out this book and go out and look for reviews that are not mine, because it's not fair why I didn't like it. Finally, I'm going to talk about 4,000 Weeks Time Management for Mortals by Oliver Bukerman, and this is a book I read for work, for a book club I am running for work. And I picked it up because I teach time management, but anti-productivity time management. And my whole thing when I teach is that the point of time management is that you're going to die. And so how are you going to live your life before you die? And so when I saw the title, I thought, oh, this is amazing. It's going to be great. It is very good. Like, it is very good. And for the first, 75-80% of the book, I was honestly really loving it, highlighting like crazy. One of those books where you think, I'm going to share this with everyone. But then the last 25, 20%, 15% of the book, the author can't help himself, and he starts being much more life coachy, Silicon Valley-y type self-help. White man from a situation of privilege, talking about hacks for managing your planner, and it lost me there because the first part of the book was about mortality, embracing mortality, and all those things, and it talked about time management not being about tips and hacks, and then by the end you get a list of tips and hacks, and I don't know if that was the author or the publisher, but the book lost me there. And also, it suffers from this thing that a lot of self-help suffers from, especially self-help written by white male authors of a certain context, privilege, that it loses sight of reality and of other people's contexts. There was this part that actually made me laugh out loud, because the author is talking about CEOs, and or that type of demographic, and how busy their lives are, and how they are so busy because they want more money, but they can't enjoy that money, and they can't enjoy their life because they're so busy. And then he makes the comparison of but hey, you should be more like poor people, because poor people don't have anything to do, and so they're happier than you. And he doesn't say it like that, but that's the message. And so he talks about happiness index in underdeveloped countries, and he gives the example of Mexico, and it made me laugh because it's of course, yes, yeah, okay. So that made me laugh, but he's basically talking about the happiness index of Mexico being higher than the happiness index of the US. And according to him, that's because here in Mexico, because we don't have CEOs, apparently, even though there are big companies, apparently they don't have CEOs. So because they don't have that type of we don't have that type of demographic, we don't have people in management, we don't have that type of thing, we are happier because our to-do lists aren't as big as to-do lists that people have in the US. And so we're happier, and people in the US should learn from us. And that made me laugh on many levels. But one of those is that here in Mexico, what we always hear is that the happiness index of countries that are more developed is higher than the happiness index here, because people in more developed countries have their basic needs met. You know, good healthcare, good education, and so the index is higher. And I don't appreciate people saying like, well, yes, like your rights are not met, but you don't have a big to-do list, so like, yay you. And I don't know, I just thought that was funny. I feel like most of those things are authors taking a statistic that they found on a Medium article and quoting it and taking it out of context. And so even though I highlighted the book like crazy, and even though I will be quoting some quotes in I don't know, to students and stuff for specific topics, I wouldn't recommend this book without caveats, because the more I step back from it, the more I think, yeah, no, I wouldn't just recommend this book to anyone and not give them warnings and caveats. And then the most recent book that I read that I finished is Dragon Haven by Robin Hobb, but that book I talked about when I talked about Dragon Keeper at the beginning of the video. So those are all the books that I wanted to talk about today. The highlight from this time period has definitely been The Heart or Mend the Living by Maylis de Kerangal. I am going to be revisiting that book. There are certain sections of the book that I honestly couldn't even talk about that book with my mom without having my voice tremble from wanting to cry. It was so personal to me, and it's honestly amazing. Like, please, if you're a literary fiction reader, or if anything I said about that book sounds interesting to you, definitely pick it up. It's so good. I will be reading more from that author. And I was going to read you the first sentence, but at the end of the year I'm going to do a video about the best opening sentences from 2023, and that one is definitely going to be on there, so I'm not going to spoil it for you guys. But that would be all for today. I will see you soonish with another bookish video, and in the meantime I wish you happy reading.